Welcome back, everyone. This is Chase, and joining me today is Stine Danielle, an artist and one of our 2022 Outdoor Rec Archive research fellows. It's great to see you again, and great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I should mention that there's a previous episode where you actually presented at our Outdoor History Summit as well. So for those who are interested, you go really in depth into your project and have visuals and everything like that. Would highly recommend. But we wanted to jump on and just learn a little bit more about the project post research, post visit to Utah State. Wanted to learn a little bit more about kind of where you're at with the project and just provide a little bit of an update. But before that, do you mind sharing a little bit more about your background and your previous work leading up to this project?
Yeah, absolutely. So the outdoors has been a huge part of my life since my mid-20s. I've gone on backpacking and road trips in the United States. I've section hiked along the Bruce Trail in Ontario, among other adventures. And in 2021, I became a Master of Fine Arts student at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I wanted to use the experience I had gained outdoors to create a series of artworks that examine my participation in outdoor recreation in North America. And this was a stretch for me because prior to that, I had an art practice that was generally more documentary. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Toronto Metropolitan University, and in that education, so much of my time there was embedded in documentary work and in, I guess you could say, a fine art realm. And so working with my experience in the outdoors was really, I think, difficult for me at first because I was talking about, let's say, my family history. I was talking solely just about my experience, just myself. And that was really scary. But in pursuit of this work, I knew that a large part of that would mean that I had to look into the deep roots of outdoor recreation. And in doing that, I learned about the history of American and Canadian park systems, both of which involve the displacement of Indigenous populations and segregation of BIPOC communities. And it's this very legacy that has created barriers, not only for myself, but other BIPOC to participate outdoors to this day. And an example of that is the Outdoor Foundation's Outdoor Participation Trends Report, which found in 2021, 54% of Americans participate outdoors. And of those participants, 72% of outdoor recreation participants are white. So while the outdoor industry is reckoning with this legacy and making strides in their DEI efforts, this has led me to understand outdoor recreation as what I call a forked space between inclusion and exclusion, meaning that it is not completely one or the other. As a settler and first generation immigrant woman of color, I've had to ask myself questions such as, what does it mean for me to be a participant in outdoor recreation in North America? How does that meaning change in the context of my identity, and how am I perceived, or how do I perceive myself in these outdoor spaces? So, yeah.
That's amazing. What led you to like wanting to communicate like these very complex ideas and interactions like through art? Obviously you're an artist, you're creatively inclined. Like what is the challenge of trying to communicate all these very complex ideas in an art piece or art installation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I often think about this all the time, is that communicating through art can at times feel, I think maybe not even at times, but most of the time it feels challenging because your interpretation of a certain experience might be entirely different from the person next to you. But I think that there's a lot of strength in that, or a lot of opportunity that, because in trying to communicate a specific experience, you open up a conversation. And so For example, for me, I knew this experience that I had outdoors, while incredible, and I think spending time outdoors is meaningful, it also brought some challenges for me because I didn't grow up doing these things. I remember going on school field trips to certain parks and once or twice going on camping trips with other large Filipino families in the Greater Toronto area. But neither of those experiences left a large impression on me. It wasn't until my late 20s where I had the opportunity to be in California that I got to hike for long periods of time or backpack. And I always felt odd at times because it wasn't something that I was introduced to very young. I often felt like I was doing things wrong, and I also didn't see people like myself outdoors. And when I did, it was always this sort of recognizing the person that I would see and knowing that we were both occupying a space that we weren't typically found in. And so I think that given that experience and to be able to translate it into art or even fine art is a really difficult task, but I think worthwhile.
I think so too. I think it's interesting that you brought up the OIA's participation report, which is so
Mhm.
data driven.
Yes.
And there's a need for the data driven, but there's also a need
Mhm.
to create experiences like this that can speak to people in an entirely different way. And having those two, I think those two in tandem are very powerful together. So I'm glad that you brought up the participation report. I think
Yeah.
that paired with
Mhm.
what you're trying to create is really interesting and really impactful.
Mhm. Thank you.
Could you walk us through a little bit of like what the initial proposal was when you encountered the Outdoor Rec Archive and the fellowship
Yeah.
program? Like, what is it that you wanted to encounter or dig deeper into in the archives that could help your project or your initiative?
Mhm. Yeah. So at the beginning of the project, it was important to me to dive deeper into the history of outdoor recreation. And so prior to coming across the Outdoor Recreational Archive, I first looked at and worked with the National Park Service's history collection. And, going through that collection, it's no surprise that the images in the archive marginalized BIPOC communities. But I knew that in working with archives, that there was a lot of potential not just for archives, but other similar companies and institutions who work with images to work collaboratively with the communities that they have historically excluded in order to create a fuller representation of our past and present. And so applying this to my own art practice, I want to create work that would allow me to insert my own experience outdoors and um, in working with the archives, I also wanted to see how far I could push my understanding of what photographs are and how they are existing in different contexts. So, like, what does it mean to take something that already exists and subvert it through one's own understanding? And in the context of the outdoors, like, how do I begin to inhabit and make those spaces my own? And so, after looking at the images in the National Park Service history collection, that's where I sought to find other archives that might include a broader range of people recreating outdoors. And so I went on Google, I searched for outdoor archive, and Google delivered. And that's how I found the Outdoor Recreational Archive and information on the research fellowship. And um, honestly, for me, looking at the information on the website, I was really um, excited to see all the information about the catalogs. And I interpreted, I guess, generally speaking, I've always interpreted catalogs as material that in the past disseminated information not only about a particular product or a particular brand, but a particular experience or people and space. And so one might consider that these materials presented authentic representations of the outdoors. And so I propose to work with those catalogs to explore the visual legacy of outdoor companies in North America, not only to build on my own current research and to create a deeper connection between my lived experience and art practice, but to also explore how these catalogs represented the participation of BIPOC, and how it was proliferated or excluded.
So what did you find when you arrived on campus and you started digging into the materials? What did you encounter?
Well, I have to say that Utah State's campus is so beautiful. It's the most beautiful campus I've ever been to. So I was really excited. And when I finally went into the archive space, I was also really excited too. I've worked in archives before as a student, and I have to say, where I've worked was, I guess you could say, more modern, and I really liked the leather chairs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was really excited and talking to Clint about what the archives are like. And, um, I only had just short of 2 weeks there, and I wanted to go into it with the expectation that I would be able to shift my focus when need be. And it turned out that that would be the case, because everyone that worked there was really generous with their time, and showed me things that I wouldn't have considered because I came into it with the expectation of I'm going to look at REI and the North Face and Patagonia. And then Clint introduced me to Summit Magazine. And I had never come across it before, but I was immediately drawn to their design and their essays and low fidelity printing methods. And so I think by the end of it, I ended up spending most of my time skimming through Summit Magazine's issues. And yeah, that ended up being what I did there. I looked at catalogs mostly of these larger brands, outdoor brands, and meticulously put bookmarks using the archival paper that was given to me, and inserting them in different signatures for scanning. Yeah, that was sort of my research method process. Very, very laid back.
Yeah. What were your findings when you were looking through those like major companies, their catalogs? Like what did you find in terms of representation? Was it what you expected? Was it not what you were there any surprises?
I think that in some ways it was what I expected in terms of there being a limited amount of representation, but that wasn't a surprise to me because given what I had already seen from the National Park Service, I knew that what I would be looking at with the Outdoor Archive would be quite similar. But there were surprises in that I found that REI represented more BIPOC in comparison to other brands starting in the 60s. Other brands such as Patagonia prior to the 1990s represented many women. But the earliest issue I saw of any BIPOC was 1982. I also gathered that while more BIPOC were represented in the 80s and onwards, much of them were locals of a particular place abroad, or they were depicted in relation to labor, like sewing clothes or garments, general garments or equipment, rather than participating in outdoor recreation. And that was quite consistent for brands such as the North Face. Another thing I also noticed was that very little BIPOC. I think I only saw 2 images of them in winter sports. So I rarely saw representation there too.
Yeah. That's I feel like I haven't done as much of research as you have, but I feel like in a lot of cases it was like more like studio based photography than on mountain or
Yes,
on
that too.
out in the activities. I don't know if that was the case in your experience.
Yeah, that was often the case with REI. So
Mhm.
while they represented more BIPOC, it was mostly in studio and modeling clothes or modeling clothes sometimes outside.
Yeah. I think there's so much opportunity to dig even deeper into the catalogs to
Mhm.
quantify and go even deeper in terms of how people are represented in
Mhm.
marketing materials over the decades. And So it's such an interesting area to study, and so important that
Mhm.
I don't know where, if you had more time, where would you go deeper?
Oh gosh, I briefly went through some marmot and a Japanese outdoor brand called Snow Peak. I would
Mhm.
have loved to see more of their catalogs, but I believe that there actually weren't that many for Snow Peak, for example. Um, but if I could, I would also look at any, like just anything and everything, because walking back into the archives and looking at all the shelves, I wish I could have stayed even a month because there's just so
Yeah,
much to see.
yeah. Yeah, Snow Peak is interesting because it's kind of the Chouinard equipment of Japan in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. Started, I think, earlier than Chouinard equipment. It may have even started in the 50s versus Chouinard
Hmm.
equipment, which was mid to late 60s or early 70s.
Hmm.
And so there's an even longer history there to dig into. And it's we wish we had more catalogs from them. We only have more recent catalogs.
Wow.
I think our latest from Snow Peak are from maybe 2002, maybe
Oh
2000,
yeah.
but
Hmm.
nothing prior to the 2000s. So yeah, there's definitely gaps within the collection as well that we hope to fill at some point. Um, you touched on like having to pivot a little bit,
Yes.
or discovering something like a magazine like Summit, and that opening up kind of a new area for you to dig into. um did did your projects completely change or change in any way based on those maybe those tangents or other catalogs and magazines that you found along the way? Did the project change?
I'd say that um, the project didn't change with working in the archives. It actually changed while working in Utah, just because I was there in the state and I have had access to certain parks or spaces while I was there. And I think that that was both unexpected but also exciting because I realized that a huge part of my project is working with physical campsites. And I realized I'm in Utah. I can use the weekends when the archive is closed to explore what's around. And I ended up driving to Antelope Island and I filmed myself setting up and taking down my campsite. And that didn't, well, it wasn't planned. And I wonder if even now, if the archive actually influenced me because I was seeing all these images of tents and seeing people set up camp, and I was like, maybe I should photograph myself doing the same thing too. And so, in that sense, the project had changed a little, and I'm excited to do more of that.
That's great. Where is the project at currently? So since you left Utah, um, I guess what does that look like once you've gathered all this information? Where do you go from
Mhm.
there, and kind of where are you at currently with your work?
Yeah. So while the work is still ongoing, I had the fortune 2 weeks ago of showing a series of images in the project at Art Fair Philippines in Manila. It was an incredible experience, and it was facilitated by Tarsier Pictures, which is a gallery and creative production group based in Manila. And I definitely didn't expect that work I would make about my experience in North America would find its way back where my family is from. And so that was really exciting. Apart from that, I recently made the difficult decision to leave my MFA program. And so I've had to shift priorities as I reevaluate my next steps. However, the work still continues. Being an artist in an MFA program offered me many opportunities, including a sought after studio space. But fortunately, I consider myself to be a maker who often functions without a physical studio space. Dania Nakfi, an artist I admire, calls the work you make outside of the studio an incubation period, which is the time in which you spend thinking about how to approach an artwork. You read books, do research, look for other art for inspiration and accumulate experiences to help influence your process of art making. And so it's definitely not a graceful process, though. I think that artists often wrestle with the pressures they put on themselves by not actively making and showcasing work. I'll be candid and say that I experience this a lot. But ultimately, I know that the people I build relationships with, the books and essays I read, and most importantly, the time I spend outdoors, all play an important role in the work I make. It's the very process that led me to pursue this project in the first place. And so that's where the project is currently at. But my hope is that within the next few months, I can apply what I've learned during this incubation period to start working with the digitized images I received from my time at the fellowship and use them as inspiration to create future artwork, including building new objects and photographing myself more outdoors.
Are you able to share like what, I mean, you kind of alluded to this, but what
Mhm.
can you give an idea of like what form some of this material might take, or what type of medium you're working in?
Yeah. So while I'm in this incubation period and doing more research than making, I am thinking about or planning to make trail signs, and playing with text. And actually, that was inspired by some images I had come across in Summit magazine, because while there are a few images, most of the earlier issues are text heavy. They're essays not only by writers from Summit magazine, but from their readers, letters that they published, and the kind of language that was used in those issues was, I think, really inspiring to me. And I want to play with how language can change um, our experience outdoors in a trail sign. So there's that. And I'm also looking to find more campsites with tent tabs. Weird obsession, but I'm into it.
I love it. I love it. Um, I guess at this point, how can people stay connected with your work and stay tuned in for when, I hope there's a gallery opening somewhere, or this material becomes, available for people to access or view. What's the best way for people to stay connected to your work
Yeah,
and keep up with that?
I need to do better with showing my work, but they can stay connected with me through my website, which is stinedanielle.com, or my Instagram account, which is Stine__Danielle.
That's great. And then what's the future of just your work in general? How can people support you and make this a reality? I guess, are there limitations you're facing? Are there things that you need? Like, we want to mobilize our community if we can, and help with this project if you need that help.
Yeah, it is very hard for me to ask for help, but I'm learning that it's good too. And something I often struggle with is funding. It really sucks to say, it feels weird to say, but um, Canada has great funding for the arts, but sometimes that can be limiting because you can only make work within a certain city or region. And the work I want to make is across Canada or in different parts of the United States. And so any opportunity to be able to make my work with the financial means is welcomed and appreciated. And not only that, I think more than the funding is just opportunities to work with communities outdoors. There are a lot of incredible organizations in both Canada and US. For example, Park Bus is a Toronto and Squamish-based organization that helps connect city dwellers with nature through accessible transportation options. There's Disabled Hikers, who is based in Washington State. Disabled Hikers is an entirely disabled-led organization. They help to celebrate and facilitate experiences for disabled people. So working with communities who are actively outdoors or working to support people to go outdoors is always welcome. And if you're in the Greater Toronto area, hit me up. let's go for a hike.
That's great. Stine, this has been great just to catch up with you and learn about where you're at with the project. I'm so excited to see it come together. It was great to have you here on campus as well.
Yeah.
I hope we can see you here again on campus. I'm glad that you loved it so much. We take it for granted how beautiful it is. So it's always nice to see someone who's never been to campus before join us, because it is a beautiful place to be.
Yes, absolutely.